In Game of Thrones, Arya Stark has her fair share of close calls when it comes to death, and one of those close encounters happens at the earliest parts of Season 1, and could have easily changed the entire direction of the show. In Episode 2 of the first season of Game of Thrones, on the road to King's Landing, the group stops around the Trident, the place where Robert Baratheon ended Rhaegar Targaryen and pretty much won the rebellion. Arya was play fighting with her friend Micah, the butcher's boy, until Joffrey showed up and started torturing him. This led to Arya hitting Joffrey with a stick to protect her friend, and then Joffrey tried attacking Arya with his very real sword, with no concern for potentially injuring her. This all comes to a head when he literally threatens to kill Arya, but before he can actually go through with it, Nymeria attacks and stops this potentially fatal encounter. But what if Nymeria hadn't stopped Joffrey that day? What if Joffrey was able and willing to follow through with his threat to end one of the Stark girls? How would the story change? Before we get into that, if you guys like what I have to say, feel free to drop a like and hit that subscribe button for more videos. Now, let's get into it. So, there don't need to be any real or substantial changes to the story to make Joffrey killing Arya more possible or plausible. We already know through various events surrounding Joffrey that he is a deranged individual, more than willing to take a person's life or cause bodily harm simply because he was upset, angry, and felt wrong in some way or another. Nymeria just happens to be slower, or maybe Joffrey is just faster this time around. In this timeline, things go about the same with the kids fighting up until this point. Joffrey tells Arya that he'll gut her, and then without wasting any time, he stabs her in the heat of the moment. There's even this really crazed look in his eyes as well. Sansa immediately goes into shock and drops the wine that Joffrey gave her. For a long time, Sansa has lived in a fairy tale when it comes to how the world works. She builds Joffrey up as this really great guy because he's a prince. In the stories, princes are noble, heroic, they can do no wrong. They don't murder the sisters of the women that they're supposed to marry. Sansa loves the idea of being with a prince more than she actually cares about Joffrey, in my opinion. It's this ideology, this fairy tale that causes her to say that Joffrey and Arya are spoiling things when they get into a fight.
Stop it, both of you! You're spoiling everything!
But what could spoil things more than the prince you romanticize killing your own sister? It's not something that Sansa would expect, and she sit there in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. I don't see her rushing at Joffrey or anything like that because Sansa isn't that confrontational of a person in the early seasons. And like I said, she's still processing the fact that the guy she's supposed to marry just stabbed her sister. Like the canon timeline, Nymeria will lunge at Joffrey, but here's another point where things take a turn for the worse. In the original, Nymeria just bit Joffrey on the arm when he threatened to kill Arya. It's to be expected, the direwolves are fiercely loyal to their Stark companions and will even kill for them. We see this with Summer. When Bran's life is in danger, he kills his would-be assassin without a second thought. This is what I think is going to happen to Joffrey now. With the death of Arya, Nymeria will be even more enraged when she attacks the prince, and now that Arya is dead, there isn't anyone around to pull her off when she goes to work on Joffrey. Sure, there's Sansa, but like I said earlier, she's in shock right now. Eventually, she'll come to her senses when Joffrey starts screaming, and she'll go to try to pull Nymeria off of him. But by the time she manages to get the direwolf away, it's too late. Prince Joffrey is dead, along with her little sister. To say this girl would be traumatized is an understatement. Nymeria would end up curling up next to a now dead Sansa, and I imagine Sansa, who is going through a lot of emotions right now, chases Nymeria away. Not like Arya did originally, where she wanted the wolf to run away because she would be killed for harming a prince. Sansa's reaction is more emotional and angry. She still hasn't fully processed what happened, and she goes from being in shock to lashing out, kind of blaming Nymeria for what happened in some twisted way. Remember, she's a kid, so have some kind of grace here. It's a misguided belief since Joffrey started everything, but like I just said, she's a kid, and the fantasy that she's been idolizing has just been torn apart. Quite literally, in fact. And she may be a bit drunk as well, since she was drinking with Joffrey beforehand, so that's another factor here. But regardless, she drives Nymeria off, and then she goes to get help. Once again, there is a hunt for Nymeria for killing the crown prince. But the scene with Robert, Ned, and Cersei as they try to get to the bottom of what really happened would be much, much darker and so much more serious. This isn't about a kid who got roughed up and scarred, but is otherwise okay. Two children are dead. one stabbed and the other mauled. Ned would be heartbroken and furious. Cersei would be a mix of heartache, grief, and unbridled rage at the death of her son. Robert would be dejected, depressed, and also a bit angry. I could see this hitting Robert pretty hard actually, because even though Robert wasn't the best or the most active father in his kids' lives, he did care on some level for Joffrey. He even admits this on his deathbed. He regrets not spending enough time with him and teaching him how to be a man.
I should have spent more time with you. Shown you how to be a man. I was never meant to be a father.
And he even tells Ned to make sure that Joffrey is better than him before he dies. So Robert cares about his kid. I could definitely see him feeling like a failure as a father here. He didn't really spend time with his son and now he's gone. The conversation kinda goes the same like it did in canon, with everyone trying to find out what actually happened, except it's going to be a lot more emotionally charged, especially from Cersei's side. Cersei loves her children, perhaps to a fault, and always overlooks any wrongdoing that might have come from them, specifically with Joffrey. I could easily see Cersei trying to paint the Starks as the villains here, that Arya and Nymeria attacked Joffrey unprovoked and he defended himself. That's why Arya died, and the only perspective on the conflict that she's willing to accept. Ned could potentially counter this, having seen the body of his own daughter and the stab wound that killed her. Ned would have spent time with the direwolves, seeing how they act and how big they are. Maybe he could reason that with how strong the direwolves are, if Arya really told Nymeria to attack Joffrey and she was set on doing that, it's unlikely that he could have stabbed Arya in self-defense if Nymeria was out for the kill from the start. But even with that reasoning, it'll just be a helpless back and forth, both sides denying guilt and Robert unsure of what to do. Ultimately, it'll come down to Sansa again, and she'll be told to tell them what really happened since she was the only one there. She's still going through it though, still in shock and an emotional mess, but I actually think in this timeline, with some prodding, Sansa will actually tell the truth. From Joffrey antagonizing Micah to killing Arya and Nymeria killing him. Before, in the main version of events, Sansa lies about what really happened and says that she doesn't know because it happened too fast.
I don't know. I don't remember. Everything happened so fast. I didn't see.
Liar!
This happens for a couple reasons. On the one hand, she doesn't want to expose Joffrey because she romanticizes being a princess and desperately wants to be liked by him. On the other hand, she doesn't want to incriminate Arya by lying and saying that she started the fight. But here, Joffrey and Arya are dead. She has no reason to lie or withhold information since there is no one to protect. There is no point in holding on to her fantasy and hope for being liked by Joffrey now that he's gone. So Sansa will end up telling the truth, which incriminates Joffrey as the attacker. Cersei, even if this ends up being said by Sansa, is not going to go with the idea that her precious boy was actually a deranged killer, and will probably even go as far as to say that Sansa had a hand in murdering Joffrey too. That it was a team effort between her and Arya, and that's why her son is dead. She'd demand that Sansa be held accountable in her rage, and since Nymeria can't be found, like in the canon timeline, she'll also say that Lady should die as well. But Ned's gonna put his foot down here. He already lost one daughter, there is no reason to subject his other daughter, who is already very traumatized, to any more torture, and he's not gonna let Lady get killed this time around. Once again, Arya is dead, and so is Joffrey. That's enough death for one day. Robert Baratheon would ultimately agree with Ned. He'll see that Sansa most likely had nothing to do with his son's death, and after being worn down so much emotionally, he won't seek to punish Lady just to please Cersei even if Nymeria can't be found. This is something that heavily aggravates Cersei, but there's nothing that she can do about it. Things will become very tense between everyone, and Ned will come to a realization as he looks down at the dead body of Arya. His wife Catelyn was right. He shouldn't have left home. Starks and the South just don't mix. Perhaps he should have adhered to the example set by his father and older brother, who were killed by the Mad King.
Your father and brother rode south once, on a king's demand.
A different time. A different king.
Now that his daughter is dead, Ned would want to go back to Winterfell and give her a proper send-off. But not only that, with the death of his daughter and tension so high with Cersei and the Lannisters, Ned is going to renounce his position as Robert's Hand of the King. Once he goes back to the north, he's gonna stay there. He doesn't see traveling to King's Landing and being in the south as safe anymore, even if Robert is his best friend. So already, this vastly changes the events of Season 1. With the death of Joffrey at the hands of Nymeria, young Tommen is now heir to the Iron Throne. With the death of Arya, Ned leaves Robert and goes back home with his last daughter and her direwolf. So there will be no investigating the murder of Jon Arryn, no finding Gendry on the streets of King's Landing. He never finds the book that confirms Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella as bastards. The Starks are somewhat safe since they aren't in the Lion's Den anymore, but that doesn't mean that everything is gonna be okay. Catelyn is distraught when Ned gets back and finds out that her daughter is dead. She already had to fear for Bran's life, but now losing her daughter is gonna be tough, to say the least. I imagine Jon will also have it a bit rough at the Wall because outside of Robb, Arya is definitely the sibling he was closest to. So hearing about her death would definitely be painful. There would be a lot of discontent in the north over the murder of Arya, but with the death of Joffrey, they won't really act on it, but things will eventually come to a head. A concern I could see here though that could add fuel to the fire is the Cat's Paw assassin. After the death of Arya, Ned would arrive back home to the knowledge that there was an assassination attempt on his son, Bran. So I can only imagine the rage he would feel at losing one child and then coming home and finding out that he almost could have lost another one. Once again, the Starks will come to suspect foul play, but at this point, none of them know who sent the assassin. They'll suspect the Lannisters though, like they did in canon when it was just Cat. They did get a letter from Lysa as well that warns them about the Lannisters, and with the death of Arya, even though that seems more like an isolated incident involving a psychopath than anything else, it would just add more fuel to that fire and bring further division between the families. I honestly think the Cat's Paw is really important because of what happens after the failed assassination. Catelyn wrote south to inform Ned about it and tell him about her suspicions, but she was intercepted by Littlefinger, who spun the tale that the dagger that almost killed her son belonged to Tyrion, and therefore incriminated the Lannisters and really set the Starks against them. But if Ned goes back home, perhaps before Catelyn can even leave, she has no reason to go to King's Landing. She won't meet with Littlefinger and have that tale spun on her. This means on that ride back to Winterfell, she won't get overzealous and capture Tyrion, since she won't even be going that route to begin with because she's staying home. If Tyrion is never taken, this can prevent Tywin from laying siege to the Riverlands and getting on the Tully's bad side. Now, there will still be suspicion and animosity between the families, but when it comes to actually taking action, I don't think anything will be set in stone yet, because Bran's attempted murder is still a big question mark. They have an inkling, but nothing is confirmed. Even with that being said though, they would definitely want to investigate, even more so than in the original since one of their kids has actually died and they almost lost another one, so they have a lot more motivation. But the question then becomes, how do they investigate? I doubt they'll just go to King's Landing after everything that's happened. If the Lannisters are behind it, they wouldn't want them to know that they suspect them. This is why Catelyn showed up to the city in secret, and why Ned didn't say anything to Robert yet. Throwing accusations at your enemy in their own home is kinda stupid, and they still need time to process and grieve the loss of their daughter, along with making sure that Sansa is properly looked after because of the trauma that she has experienced. So if they do decide to investigate, it may not be for a while. Now, assuming that Robert still dies, say Cersei still manages to get him drunk, and he happens to get killed by some random boar on a hunt, Tommen will become the new king. But considering he's a bit younger than Joffrey, Cersei will proclaim herself as regent, and basically rule through Tommen. Also, at this point in the story, Tywin might be Hand of the King if Ned ended up turning it down in this timeline. Something I think would happen is when Cersei comes into power through young Tommen, she will pretty much declare war with the North since she's still angry about about Joffrey. This happens through a letter which he demands a couple of things. One, for Ned to swear fealty to Tommen as king, since he is a Lord Paramount and therefore a vassal to the Iron Throne. And two, she'll demand that he and Sansa stand trial for the murder of Prince Joffrey. As I said earlier, Cersei is very biased when it comes to her own children, and very vindictive and very aggressive to those who have wronged them. Cersei wouldn't let Joffrey's death go just because Arya died, so with the death of the King Robert, she'll seek her own revenge. Though I imagine Tywin would try, and fail, to dissuade her from doing this because a fight with the North may not be the smartest idea at this moment. While, yes, this is a guy who started a conflict over a son he didn't even like getting captured, Joffrey is a different story. He murdered someone and then died himself. The matter should be closed by now. Even if you went with the story that Arya killed Joffrey, she herself was killed by Joffrey, so an example should have already been set for the family. So picking a fight with Ned over his remaining daughter over Joffrey would probably seem stupid to Tywin, but that will be the least of their concerns right now. Stannis will still rise in rebellion against the crown, and this is going to be a pretty key point. In canon, when Ned learned the truth about the king's children, Stannis was pretty much the first person he notified about the truth, as he was the oldest living brother of Robert Baratheon, and therefore the closest to him in blood, making him the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. But Stannis already knew about the kids being bastards. He was working with Jon Arryn before he died. And when the time came, he spread the word to all the houses, informing them of the same truth he already knew. Now that Ned has been isolated in the North, none the wiser of what truly went on, he'll be one of the lords to receive a letter from Stannis and learn the truth. But will he believe it? I think the Starks would believe Stannis even if they haven't been in the capital and bore witness to everything like Ned did originally, since the kids being illegitimate provides a lot of answers to their questions. It adds a motive to Bran's 2 attempted murders. Maybe he saw Cersei and Jaime and that's why he fell from the tower, because they pushed him. We saw in canon that Catelyn found one of Cersei's hairs in the tower that Bran was pushed from, and they already know the cat's paw dagger is Valyrian steel, and therefore very expensive. And with the Lannisters being the richest family in the realm, it doesn't take much to connect the dots, even if the cat's paw wasn't sent by them. This also provides a motive behind the murder of Jon Arryn. Jon Arryn and Stannis were working together, so if Jon Arryn knew the truth, it would make sense that the Lannisters had them killed to cover up their secret, even though that was Littlefinger and Lysa. The evidence would be damning, and I could see Ned signing on without a second thought to support Stannis as the rightful heir, especially since his alternative is swearing fealty to the family that killed his daughter and possibly wants to kill the other one. This would be a pretty big change, since knowing Ned and his character, if he's alive during the War of the Five Kings, there is no instance where I see him reasonably becoming the king in the North like Robb did and pushing for independence. I also think that with Ned around, this prevents Theon from betraying the Starks. Theon already views Ned as a father figure, and with him not dead and being a more constant figure in his life, his presence will have more lasting effects on Theon and his mindset. Also, I don't think Ned would let Theon go back to the Iron Islands to get help from Baelon either. While I'm sure he cares for Theon, he doesn't see him in the same way that Robb does. They didn't grow up together. He hasn't forgotten that Theon is a political hostage meant to keep Baelon in check. So while he'll treat him with respect, he won't be as accommodating as Robb is. Not to mention, Stannis has ships of his own, and if they support him, they may not even need Baelon to begin with like Robb did. And Baelon would most likely still be planning to join the war for himself. And that's an entirely different issue. Theon is a political hostage, and his life is meant to keep Baelon from acting out. But even in canon, before Theon was sent home by Robb, Baelon was already making plans to fight and attack the North. This would essentially put his son's life at risk, and he doesn't seem to care. He doesn't even seem to care when Theon comes home, to be honest, either. The issue here is if Baelon still makes his move, Theon's life becomes forfeit. So it begs the question, will Ned kill Theon to get back at Baelon? Because that's the whole point of having him as a political hostage. His life is meant to be a threat, a sword over your head. I feel like it would be a really complex issue, because Robb wouldn't want Theon to die if he's done nothing wrong. And that would pretty much be the argument. Is it really fair for Theon to die just because of something his dad did? Now, knowing how much Ned preaches about honor and keeping your word, it could make sense and potentially be used to argue that he would kill Theon because of this. But another facet of Ned's character is his mercy to the innocent. like the Targaryen children, Rhaegar's family. Even though Rhaegar took his sister and the kids were political threats, he didn't think they deserved to die. This also goes for Daenerys. Despite the threat she could pose in the future, he's still against killing her since she has done nothing wrong. She's a child. I believe this would apply for Theon as well, should his father rebel. Even though he's a hostage, Theon is innocent. He hasn't done anything wrong, and up until now, he's been very loyal. So killing him may not be something that Ned even wants to do. Not to mention, his death would probably be pointless as well. If Balon was willing to act like this with his son's life still in potential danger, why would his death deter him at this point? So, I don't see Ned killing Theon. And since Theon stays loyal, it's unlikely that Winterfell gets taken because taking Winterfell was Theon's plan in an effort to prove himself to his father. He lived with the Starks for years, so he knew what to do and what places to attack to spur them into action, and that way he would have an easier time taking Winterfell. If he's not around, then this doesn't happen, and it takes away an opportunity for the Boltons to turn on the Starks. And the Ironborn pretty much follow along with Balon's original plan, which was raiding smaller northern areas and taking coastal forts, which did not work out too well originally, but I digress. The War of Five Kings would be very different in this timeline, especially with Ned helping Stannis. Stannis pretty much had the smallest army in the war, but with Ned on his side, this gets him the support of the North and most likely the Riverlands as well. Assuming he still kills Renly with a shadow baby at some point, this also means he gets more support from the Stormlands as well, but the Tyrells will still be a wild card for the time being. Of course though, even with these reinforcements, it'll take some time for the North to get south to Stannis. They'll still have to go through the twins and Walder Frey, who isn't going to let them pass for free. So most likely, Robb gets engaged to Rosalind Frey as a means to bribe Walder, and with Ned around, there is no way he's letting Robb break his oath for Talissa. Now, in this timeline, I don't think the Battle of the Whispering Wood, where Jaime was captured, even happens. The only reason Jaime was out there is because he was helping Tywin raid the Riverlands because Tyrion got captured. Tywin gave Jaime command of half of their forces and then sent him off. But with Tyrion never being captured, the Riverlands are never raided, so Jaime would probably stay in the capital with his family doing his duty as a Kingsguard. Though, even if the Whispering Wood doesn't happen, there would definitely still be some fights here and there, but the one I'm sure we want to know the most about is the Battle of the Blackwater. How would things go here? In canon, Stannis almost won and took the city. It was only after Lannister and Tyrell forces showed up that he lost. But this time, Stannis has a bigger army, people from the Stormlands, the Riverlands, the North, and this time around, the tactics used in the original battle by Tyrion might not be employed here. With Tywin becoming hand of the king much sooner, Tyrion is never in that position of power. While he would be at court, he'd take a backseat to his father and may not even have a seat on the council. He'd be kept at a distance. His reduced political importance could affect some of his decisions, like making Lancel into a spy for his sister, which wouldn't even be possible if he wanted to do something like that at this point, since it's unlikely that Lancel even has a physical relationship with Cersei that Tyrion can exploit like he did in the canon timeline. In the show, Lancel only starts fooling around with Cersei when Jaime gets captured. But this entire time, he's remained in King's Landing alive and well. Not to mention, one of the reasons Lancel even agreed to this is because Tyrion threatened to tell Joffrey about what he was doing with Cersei. But Joffrey is dead, and Tommen is a child, so he doesn't have much leverage if he did go down that route. And this is pretty important because Lancel is the one who told Tyrion about the wildfire that Cersei was manufacturing. If Lancel isn't a spy, then Tyrion doesn't find out about the wildfire, and he can't come up with a plan to use it in defense of the city. He can't use it to burn Stannis' fleet. Not to mention, if Tywin is around, it's unlikely that Tyrion will even be leading the charge to battle to begin with. So this is a very different conflict, and much bigger than it was before, mind you. Stannis has more men, not just from getting help from the north, but also because his ships end up surviving. The Lannisters and Tyrells will still end up working together though. In canon, Stannis almost won this, but I think in this timeline, Stannis would actually win and take King's Landing. Not without losses though. People would end up dying here. One of them, I would say, is Ned. As they take the castle, Ned would end up confronting Jaime, and Jaime would end up killing Ned. But Jaime will also end up dying later on in the conflict. I imagine that Jaime is going to rush and try to kill Stannis, but ultimately he's going to get overwhelmed and killed before he can. This makes sense to me because this is literally how he got caught in the Whispering Wood by Robb. He basically made a mad dash for Robb so he could kill him and end the war, but eventually he got overwhelmed by people getting in his way and got captured. So Jaime having a last-ditch effort to save his family in one move is totally in line with his character. But either way, I think this marks the end of the Lannisters, at least the main line of them, since Tywin has brothers and he has cousins who could probably take up the mantle. Tywin would be dead, Jaime would be dead, Cersei and her children would be dead as well, but not because any of Stannis' people killed them. If you remember in canon, Cersei was prepared to drink poison along with her son Tommen so they could avoid being captured. This would definitely happen here as well, but Tywin isn't here to save them and stop it from happening. So Stannis gets the Iron Throne and wins the War of Five Kings, which might have a different name in this history. This could be a bit of an issue though, because Stannis has had a change in religion, that being R'hllor, the Lord of Light, and Melisandre would still be a prominent presence in his life. With them winning the Battle of the Blackwater, it'll just feed into her beliefs and her prophecies, which will be extended to Stannis. So there may be some discontent among the followers of the Faith of the Seven, but that's a different topic. For now, I believe what happens next is Robb becomes the new Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, taking up Ice, the ancestral Valyrian steel sword of House Stark. And on top of that, I think Stannis offers Robb a marriage pact. For a couple reasons. One, because Robb's father fought and died for him and you gotta reward the people who fought for you. Two, a Stark-Baratheon marriage was promised a long time ago, and with how Stannis goes on about duty and whatnot, I could see him trying to make good on this, especially with how much the Starks have gotten screwed over. Both matches, Lyanna and Robert, Sansa and Joffrey, ended in death, and therefore went unfulfilled. One of them technically wasn't even legitimate since Joffrey was a bastard. So I could see Stannis trying to make amends in some way. But he's not just doing this to reward the Starks or the kindness of his own heart. This marriage pact offers a way to keep the North in line now that Ned is dead and the war is done. And because Stannis also needs heirs. Let me explain. As of right now, he and his only daughter Shireen seem to be the only remaining trueborn Baratheons with Robert and Renly dead, and Stannis has yet to sire a son of his own. So the plan is similar to what Tywin did in GOT when it came to Tyrion and Sansa. With Sansa being the last Stark around, she had a claim to Winterfell. If she had children with Tyrion, even if they bore the name Lannister, they would have Stark blood and therefore a claim to Winterfell and the North through their mother. It's through this future marriage to Shireen that he hopes to extend the Baratheon line. Now, to be fair, these kids would be born Starks, but Stannis could always just change their names or make the marriage matrilineal to avoid all the complicated steps. That being said, who is Shireen gonna get betrothed to? Well, it's not gonna be Robb, since I already said earlier in the video he's gonna be marrying Rosalind Frey, and he won't be breaking that oath. Not to mention, it wouldn't be good for the Lord of Winterfell to get into a matrilineal marriage. The most obvious choice is one of Robb's brothers. It probably won't be Bran because he can't use his legs anymore. The most likely option is that Rickon gets betrothed to Princess Shireen and sent to Ward in King's Landing with Stannis. Now his character can have some actual importance to the story. From here though, the Starks would go back to Winterfell and most likely clean up the Ironborn with help from Stannis should they have the numbers. Balon would end up being killed, and it's likely that Theon takes over as Lord of the Iron Islands. But that might be an issue if Euron comes back. Then another big issue is Daenerys, since she'll be coming back at some point, and I don't see any room for compromises between her and Stannis, even with the dragons. Then there are the White Walkers, which would always be a looming threat. There's a lot that could happen here to be certain, but this is what I've managed to think up so far, and I think this is where I'm going to stop the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, tell me your thoughts down below, and I will see you all next time.